واليوم نأمل.
Today we are working on partnership opportunities with $600 billion, including agreements.
Moving on, the global race for influence and relevance in Africa is heating up. More and more countries are vying for military, political, and economic control.
Saudi Arabia just made a move that's shaking up global diplomacy, and Africa is at the center of it. With over $25 billion pledged and 40 embassies strategically expanding across the continent, Riyadh is signaling a bold shift in its foreign policy game. This isn't just about oil or optics. This is about influence, alliances, and long-term investments in Africa's future. From mega infrastructure projects to soft power plays, the kingdom is rewriting its relationship with the global south. This story was first reported by the Africa News Agency. Let's break it down. The scale of Saudi Arabia's Africa push. In early 2025, Saudi Arabia announced an ambitious plan: a diplomatic expansion to 40 embassies across Africa and a $25 billion pledge to support economic development on the continent. This commitment signals a strategic pivot from its historical focus on the Gulf and Western alliances, aiming to deepen ties with fast-growing African economies. With Africa's GDP growth projected at around 4% annually and a population expected to reach 2.5 billion by 2050, Saudi Arabia sees a powerful opportunity to both diversify its global partnerships and contribute to Africa's economic ascent. Under the leadership of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the kingdom has launched a $25 billion investment fund strategically focused on energy, infrastructure, agriculture, health, and education. This initiative is already catalyzing major development projects across Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, and Ethiopia. In Kenya alone, recent projections indicate up to $3 billion may be allocated to boost renewable energy capacity, helping bridge the country's power gap while advancing Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 carbon neutrality goals. Meanwhile, Egypt is in line for new industrial parks powered by Saudi energy investments, expected to create tens of thousands of jobs. Beyond capital, Saudi Arabia plans to deploy experts in renewable technology, water management, and agricultural innovation through its new embassies. Diplomacy reimagined on the African continent. Saudi Arabia's establishment of 40 embassies in Africa signals more than symbolic presence. It's a tactical reordering of its diplomatic architecture. Previously constrained to a handful of missions mainly in North Africa, Riyadh's new footprint spans East, West, Central, and Southern Africa. Each embassy functions as an anchor for not only political outreach, but business, cultural exchange, and humanitarian coordination. In Ghana, for instance, the reopened embassy is already facilitating Saudi partnerships with local tech startups to improve digital infrastructure. In Senegal, the mission is coordinating joint medical brigades aiming to support underserved rural areas. What stands out is the multi-layered approach. Embassies aren't just diplomatic outposts. They act as accelerators linking Saudi sovereign wealth with local ecosystems. Saudi ambassadors are being appointed with backgrounds in finance, energy, and development, not just diplomacy, signaling this evolution. They're expected to actively source project ideas, advocate within Saudi government channels, and troubleshoot on-the-ground bureaucratic hurdles. Under the leadership of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, this diplomatic expansion is being implemented with strategic foresight. A recent diplomatic briefing in Riyadh confirmed that each of the 40 new embassies across Africa will host a joint steering committee made up of Saudi government officials, private sector leaders, and local African representatives, driving economic growth through strategic investment. The lion's share of that $25 billion pledge is earmarked for strategic investments aimed at fueling sustainable growth across key sectors. Energy takes precedence. Nearly $10 billion is slated for renewable energy projects, solar, wind farms, and green hydrogen in countries like Morocco, South Africa, and Egypt. Morocco's Noor complex, the world's largest concentrated solar power plant, is currently exploring a Saudi-led expansion expected to double its capacity by 2027. Wind initiatives in South Africa's Eastern Cape are also gaining traction, backed by both financial and technical input from Riyadh. These efforts reflect the kingdom's broader commitment to sustainable energy development under the leadership of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Agriculture follows closely, with approximately $4 billion earmarked for irrigation modernization, agri-tech partnerships, and food processing infrastructure in Nigeria, Kenya, and Ethiopia, addressing both food security and creating new export revenue streams. Infrastructure remains a key pillar of this strategy as well, with $6 billion directed toward roads, rail links, and ports, all part of a long-term vision to strengthen intra-regional connectivity and support economic integration across the continent. In Tanzania, a Saudi-funded rail corridor is underway between Dar es Salaam and Dodoma, cutting travel time and transporting exports more efficiently. The remaining funding is allocated to healthcare and education, establishing medical research hubs and joint university programs. Saudi universities are considering branch campuses in Ghana and Rwanda, bringing together STEM research, local talent, and international expertise. These investments aren't isolated. They feed a broader ambition to catalyze private sector growth. Saudi investment houses are partnering with African pension funds to co-finance venture projects focused on fintech, logistics, and manufacturing, igniting domestic entrepreneurship while creating new markets for Saudi capital. Geopolitical weight and strategic alignment. Saudi Arabia's pivot to African engagement carries significant geopolitical implications. As global powers like China and the US ramp up influence on the continent, Riyadh is positioning itself as a third pole, independent yet complementary. The timing is critical. The African Union's Agenda 2063 emphasizes continental unity and development, making Saudi's investment pledge a high-profile endorsement of those goals. Increasing its diplomatic footprint also grants Saudi Arabia added clout in regional forums such as the UN, where support from a voting bloc of African states can advance its positions on issues like Yemen, climate policy, and regional security. Moreover, energy and defense are quietly entwined. The Saudi government is looking to deepen military cooperation with select African nations, setting up training exchanges, maritime security initiatives in the Gulf of Guinea, and joint counterterrorism efforts. Nigeria, for example, has expressed interest in Saudi-backed training programs for its naval forces. And in East Africa, Ethiopia and Kenya are exploring cybersecurity and border security coordination with Riyadh. That interlocking of economic and security engagement reflects a modern projection of influence, one built not on military bases, but on mutually beneficial strategic partnerships. Additionally, with global attention on climate, Saudi Arabia is securing its legacy beyond oil by investing heavily in green infrastructure abroad, burnishing its reputation as a responsible global stakeholder while countering criticisms of its domestic policies. Challenges, local impact, and perception. While the scale of Saudi Arabia's investment is impressive, its success depends on addressing local concerns and skepticism. Africans recall past investments that stalled due to bureaucracy, land rights issues, or that benefited expatriate workers more than local labor forces. Saudi missions are thus pledging transparency. Project agreements will include local hiring targets, community consultations, and audited spending reports. Early signs are promising. Ethiopia's Project Steering Committee recently rejected a proposed infrastructure build that failed to guarantee 30% local workforce participation. Civil society groups in Ghana and Senegal have been invited to embassy-led roundtables, offering community leaders the chance to influence project design. That level of inclusion, unusual in such big foreign investments, could set a new standard. However, political instability in certain regions poses real risk. Projects in Somalia and the Sahel are on hold pending climate assessments and security guarantees, and critics question whether Riyadh's funding model might deepen dependency rather than foster self-sufficiency. Supporting this concern, a recent IMF briefing noted caution, pointing out that loans tied to resource-backed projects can hamper long-term fiscal health. To counterbalance that narrative, Saudi Arabia has begun piloting grant-based technical assistance, especially for education, health, and agri-tech, separate from commercial investments. One such grant-funded initiative in Uganda is training 500 smallholder farmers in sustainable irrigation with no strings attached. Looking ahead, sustainability and legacy. As Saudi Arabia's embassies take root and the $25 billion fund rolls out, the long-term question centers on sustainability and legacy. Will this pivot evolve into enduring partnerships or fizzle after headlines fade? Early indicators are cautiously optimistic. Saudi officials have signaled multi-year phasing of their investments, aligning with Africa's Continental 2063 agenda and national development plans. Memoranda of Understanding, signed with over a dozen African nations, span 10-year horizons, built to allow flexibility, oversight, and recalibration through midstream evaluations. Guided by the forward-thinking leadership of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, this long-range approach reflects Saudi Arabia's commitment to lasting partnerships. Major private sector players like Aramco and the Public Investment Fund are establishing offices across the continent, embedding themselves for sustained commercial collaboration well beyond the initial investment phase. Central to this strategy is local capacity building. Saudi universities and vocational institutions are partnering with African counterparts to train engineers, agriculturists, and healthcare professionals. Climate resilience also remains a priority. Renewable energy and sustainable farming models introduced under Saudi reward mechanisms will be rolled out continent-wide if pilot results prove viable. Ultimately, success will depend on sustained engagement. If Saudi embassies remain accountable, transparent, and collaborative, and if local leaders remain empowered, this ambitious initiative could reshape African development trajectories and redefine Saudi Arabia's global role for decades ahead. But will this ambitious expansion truly uplift African nations or tilt power dynamics in Riyadh's favor? One thing's clear: Africa is no longer a geopolitical afterthought. Big thanks to the Africa News Agency for breaking this story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going.